Most people would say they would do anything needed to save the life of a loved one. But what if that loved one didn't want to be saved? What if to save them, you had to let them go? I'm Anthony Garza, and today I will be talking to you guys about euthanasia and the positivity that comes out of a sorrow circumstance, as well as why we should all be in support of euthanasia and those who make such a brave decision. So, to start, just straight from Encyclopedia Britannica, the definition of euthanasia sits as the act or practice of painlessly putting to death people suffering from painful and incurable disease or a capacitating physical disorder, or allowing them to die by withholding treatment or withdrawing artificial life support measures. And so to get into that, you got to know that there are two different types of euthanasia: passive and active. Passive being when the part where it says when life-sustaining treatments are withheld. And according to Medline Plus, a few examples of those would be do not resuscitate forms, also known as DNR forms, which in the event of your heart stopping, nobody will try to resuscitate you, as well as just declining medical treatment or advice given by the doctor. Active euthanasia is when a patient's life is ended using lethal substances or force, whether that be by the patient or somebody else. And so both of these also would fall under two different categories of voluntary and non-voluntary. Voluntary would be when consent is given directly by the patient from the patient. Um, Non-voluntary is when consent is given by somebody else who got this power because the patient is the closest to that person and they are not cognitive or in a vegetative state or basically just not able to make that call themselves. And so euthanasia can definitely be viewed negatively in the eyes of various groups of people. But what positive can come from this decision? Well, for starters, donors. According to organdonor.gov, there are 112,000 people on the organ transplant waitlist as of March 2020. And so just imagine if in all 50 states euthanasia was legalized and how fast we can get people off this wait list and get them these viable organs that they could use to help better their circumstances and for a longer life. This as well gives people who are considering euthanasia a chance to consider donating their organs and being able to have a sense of happiness and pride knowing that they helped somebody else who couldn't necessarily be helped prior. Another one would be resources. And so that would be channel the resources to patients in more optimistic situations. So this isn't to say that one life is worth more than another, but if one was to be considering euthanasia, you could also consider that the resources that are being used for you could also be used for another person who has a more optimistic circumstance. Not to mention that according to debt.org, the average hospital cost per day is around $4,000. So that's also something to consider as far as the debt of one's family. And the last, and I think my most important one, would be to end the suffering, whether that be by the patient and or the grieving of the family of the patient. Sometimes people just would rather make this decision, and for that being said, it's their choice, and if they'd like to better themselves or if their suffering is too much to handle. And so these are just a few of the reasons as to why people consider euthanasia. And while it may not be our decision or your decision, we should still maintain the respect and be supportive of these people. And so we should be really supportive because, in all reality, it's the freedom of choice. Choice has been in the news a lot lately, and I feel like we should reciprocate this energy, not only about bringing life into the world, but taking life out as well. And so this is, as I said, a personal choice and a choice that I believe should be made by these people and their physicians only. And so, of course, they can inform those who they would like in on their decisions. Not to mention to die with dignity. A lot of these people consider euthanasia because they consider it a way to go out on their own terms. A lot of people, especially my parents themselves, have said that they'd rather go and die without necessarily being, strapped to anything, to any machines, or being forced to live or even have us see that. And so, with that said, a lot of people consider that for that reason. And as I mentioned a little bit before, the quality of life. A lot of these people consider the quality of life that they have being on life support or having an incurable disease not to be the one that they want to live. And a lot of the times, these people with incurable diseases or pain are just prescribed medicines to kind of ease that pain. As a matter of fact, according to procon.org, and between the years of 1998 and 2017, 4,249 patients were prescribed drugs to ease the pain of their circumstance. This is backwards, I can tell. And 66.3% of those patients actually used those drugs to end their own life because the pain was still too unbearable. And so, to recap, we broke down what euthanasia is and the types there are, as well as the optimistic outcomes of what euthanasia can provide and why we should so support to those who are in the position to consider it. Finally, I'd just like to say that the value of life is immense, yet it's also variable. Let us not pass judgment onto those who do not feel the same as yourself about life. And you may not always know the situation of that other person as well. So take that into consideration. Thank you.